Hello, everyone who's joining us for our final session of the day. It is my great pleasure to be joined today by Osaro Otobo, who's going to talk to us a little bit about dismantling racial inequality at institutions. Osaro, thanks for joining us.
Hi, everyone. Thanks for having me today. So I'm going to be talking about dismantling racial inequality at institutions. I am a consultant, so I work in the higher education sector, and I specialize in equality and diversity, as well as governance and democracy. So currently I am conducting a research project which is looking into how universities have handled Black Lives Matter responses, and then the subsequent work that they are doing as a result of that. So looking at how they specifically have tackled or tried to tackle racial inequality, the challenges that they faced. In this research project, I've also spoken to leaders of student unions and also leaders outside of the sector, which I believe is really important when we talk about decolonization. We also need to look outside of existing structures for the solution. I also am a founder of a campaign that I started earlier this year around June time, talking about my own experience of racism and the need for better reporting structures, which we'll touch on in this presentation. The campaign is called Make Diversity Count. And just a very quick thing to say, before I started working as a consultant, I worked in a university, and then I also was the first female Black president of my students' union, and I carried out 2 terms there. And a lot of my experience and my passion for decolonization in education comes from that work that I did there in my SU. So when talking about decolonization, I think it's important to know that things that might work in one specific institution may not work in others. But I also believe that there are very core principles that should be embedded across the sector to help us all fight against anti-racism and to help us carry out the decolonization work. So one thing I want us to know is that look at the different ways universities have approached this and try to figure out if that is something that might work in your SU or university. Is your university that size? Does it have that amount of resource? Does it have those sorts of people in those positions to help? So keep that in mind when you are looking at this presentation. This session will work through case studies in the research project that I mentioned. I interviewed senior leaders across the sector. So that includes vice-chancellors, pro-vice-chancellors, other people in university, senior leadership, and other staff members as well as student union leaders. I think it's really important for you to see how they personally feel about the work that is going on. So that can also help you when you're figuring out what work you want to do at your own institution. I'm going to highlight the challenges that they face, the actions that they've taken. Some of the actions, I will point them out and say, these point towards decolonization. Some of these are not exactly the best thing to do for decolonization, but I'd like you to also, when we go through the case studies, you have a look and you figure out which ones you think, oh, this is definitely decolonization, or this is just, it's not a strong enough response. So in these case studies, the people that I interviewed, everything is anonymous. And so they were able to speak freely. And I think that was really good in this sense. So we can honestly know what we're working against, especially student leaders. If you are watching this today and you're trying to figure out what senior management, senior leaders at universities may be thinking. Hopefully this will give you a bit of an insight, and so you can see how you can dismantle racial inequalities where you are. So these case studies, I'm going to highlight two specific universities here today. And then after those case studies, I'm going to highlight common challenges and also recommendations that come from all of the different universities that I interviewed. In total, they were 11 institutions that I spoke to. And so there is a real breadth of actions and challenges that you'll see here today. So University A, this university is quite a big university. You can see the amount of students that they have going there, and it's also a Russell Group university. This university is in an area that is not seen as a very diverse area. With some of the universities that I've spoken to, when they talk about challenges that they face in terms of handling decolonization, they often quote that it's difficult because of the area that they're in. I would like to say that I don't think that is a good enough excuse. So when people do say that, make sure you say, well, that's not good enough. And if university leaders are willing to go to different universities away from them because the offer is attractive enough, surely universities can make sure that the offer is attractive enough and safe enough for Black students and Black staff to come to those universities. So the challenges with this university, when tackling and trying to support the fight against racial inequality, they complained that they received a lot of abusive messages from people on social media. This includes tweets and also interactions on Facebook. One of the big issues that this Vice-Chancellor that I spoke to said that they had within their institution was that people did not see this as a big enough priority. In the current climate now with COVID, a lot of people are now using that as an excuse not to focus on this work. And I will highlight a bit later why I believe that's also not good enough. They also were very open and said that their leadership team was not very racially diverse. And they had to get to grips with handling white privilege within that leadership team. Another challenge that they have highlighted is that when they aren't doing good enough work for the fight against anti-racism and decolonization, they believe that they're not harnessing the talent that they have there in their university at a good enough level. And this is also an issue that many other senior leaders have quoted. Students publicly talking about racism and making demands. Some people see this as a good thing. Some people can see this as a negative thing. People openly talking about their experiences. So this is an example of how open some people have been when I've talked to them about what they think are the challenges in terms of tackling racial inequality. So I'm going to talk you through a list of actions that they are undergoing And some of them are, as I said, some of them may not be good enough in terms of looking at decolonization, but I think this is useful for you to see all of the list of actions that they have listed as this is good enough for us to start working on this issue. So you kind of know the mindset that you may be dealing with within your institutions. So University A, one of the things that a leader, one of the leaders in that university said was that they're focusing on building racial inequality as a focus into the strategy, and they also want to build it into the people. And I believe this approach, I think that's a very good approach. I think for long-term change, you need to have it embedded in the strategies across all of the university. And also you need to make sure that the people that you have in the institution are all on board with this mission. If it's only falls to certain individuals, it's not going to be a widespread change. So I quite liked them highlighting this as a focus. So these are some of the actions that they are undergoing. So they're having a racism strategy led by university leadership team. I think that this approach, making sure that there's buy-in from senior leadership, is so important. In institutions, there may be pockets of good practice, but if senior leadership are not on board, this can often be the downfall for strategies and the fight against the fight for decolonizing institutions. This university had open dialogues with affected groups. So these are groups like the student societies, like Afro-Caribbean Society, the BAME Staff Network, and any other people that felt really passionate about this issue. Again, I think having open dialogues with people is so important in this issue. Having quick initiation of disciplinary procedures for racism. This is something that a lot of people quote as an issue in their institutions' reporting mechanisms. And I will talk about reporting mechanisms a bit later when I talk about the campaign that I'm running, because there's a focus on that. This institution has had enough resource to have a new senior leadership role to focus on racial inequality. Often in institutions, you have your set senior leadership team, and then if something really important comes around, it may fall to someone who already has a massive remit, and this tends to make those additional things that are added to their remit not focused on enough. So I think having a good, having someone that can solely focus on this issue is important. But an important thing to note, sometimes when people, sometimes when leadership talk about decolonization, they point towards EDI, and EDI is it's a very general thing, and it can mean a lot of things to a lot of different people. So when people do point to EDI, just be mindful of that, and make sure that there is that specific focus to decolonization within that. A book club for senior managers. Education is key. And I think if this is something that is sustained, this could do a lot of good. It can force people to think about things that they ordinarily would not think about. But then also this could be seen as an easy way out for some institutions if they aren't doing this regularly. So that's another thing to be mindful of. They've changed their terminology with the Black attainment gap to the awarding gap, putting the onus on the institution for being at fault for not making sure that their Black students are getting the degree awards that they so rightly deserve. So language is important. Other actions that they're undergoing, they're building their work against racism into all of their strategies, including their education strategy, their student engagement strategy, and also strategies to do with professional services. They're looking at it at all levels. They have a dual assurance lead on EDI at board level. What does that mean? It means that at their board level, they have the different trustees that they have areas of focus so that they can hold their senior leaders to account better. And there's someone on that board that has a specific focus on EDI, and so that they can hold the senior leadership to account specifically on that issue. And I think that if institutions are serious about decolonization, there needs to be discussion at board level on this. And so I quite like that they do this. They're looking at recruitment. They're also looking at developing an inclusive curriculum. When they say inclusive curriculum, they didn't use the wording of decolonization. So when people say inclusive, you need to quiz them and think, oh, what exactly do you mean when you say inclusive? Is that in the context of decolonization? They're establishing another leadership role in education that is looking at EDI. They're looking at hate crime and online harms. And today, when we are all on Zoom, we're on Zoom right now, we're on our laptops more than ever, looking at videos and taking part in meetings in that way. We need to make sure that the support and the safety there online is robust enough for everyone. And so that's one important thing that you could probably take away today that not a lot of institutions that I have spoken to so far are looking at. They're looking at creating, well, they have created an anti-racist manifesto. And so this is something that will be embedded in all of their strategies, but this is something standalone that people can look at. And so people can know that this institution is serious about anti-racism. And they're also undergoing an independent review. So they are, they've brought in a consultant or a consultancy firm to look at all of their processes at all levels so that they can really get down to the very core of how this university operates, and so that they can highlight areas that are in need of change and focus to make sure that they are being an anti-racist university. More actions. So this university is looking at their reporting tools and they're looking at making sure there's an appropriate response to incidents. And then also another thing that they are doing, they are looking at supporting victims and making sure that there are appropriate well-being policies. And when someone experiences racism, it can affect people in different ways. It's a horrible experience and it can have a massive effect on you both physically and mentally. And having support, well-being support for victims of racism is something that a lot of universities may fall flat on. And so I think it's good to make sure that your institution has this focus, as well as improving reporting tools. And earlier I mentioned that I created a campaign called Make Diversity Count. The focus of that campaign is looking at improving anti-discrimination policy with a focus on improving reporting mechanisms. So if something does go wrong, everyone knows exactly what the procedures should be, because unfortunately, when people do speak up about racism, sometimes it can get brushed underneath the carpet and you feel like your lived experience is not valid. And so the campaign that I'm doing, we're looking at making sure that organizations across the UK, as well as universities, they have appropriate time scales for reporting incidents. And so both parties, the person handling the complaint and the person that has made the complaint, know, oh, this is the appropriate time for investigation and I should be hearing back by this point. They also need to make sure that all conversations to do with the complaint is documented, so both sides can be held accountable. And so no one can promise something behind closed doors or over the phone and then backtrack on that. And then also the campaign is looking at making sure that there is a safe and accessible way for people to speak about, for people to actually make the complaint report. And some universities may insist that it can't be anonymous, and this tends to make people not want to come forward to speak about what they've experienced. I believe that there should be a range of different ways that people can make complaints, so that there is a way for everyone to feel comfortable to talk about their experience. So that's just a little bit about the campaign I'm doing and why it's relevant for universities. So this university is looking at reviewing their reporting tools. They're also looking at raising the profile for the Race Equality Charter. So it could be at the same level as Athena Swan. So the Athena Swan looks at gender, and unfortunately, the Race Equality Charter does not have such a high profile yet, for many different reasons. One of the reasons that the Athena Swan has such a high profile is because it's linked to funding, research funding. And there are calls from people in the sector that maybe the Race Equality Charter should do the same thing. They are looking at having mandatory EDI, I'm sorry, my mouth is a bit dry. They're looking at having mandatory EDI training for students, including bystander intervention training and cultural competence training too. So they're looking at building it into their people through this way. They're also looking at other sectors locally with BAME networks to make sure that they can have regular meetings to support each other. And one thing that I mentioned before, I think it's important for us to look outside of the current structures that we know for assistance. And so this is one way that this university is doing that. They're looking at collaborating with liberation groups to ensure intersectionality. When we talk about the experiences of Black people, there is not just one experience. We are not a homogeneous group. Within being Black, there are so many different types of people. One thing that a lot of people did speak to me about was that when handling Black Lives Matter responses, some international students felt like there was only a focus on Black British students. They felt left out. And then when talking about Black people, if you look at Black men compared to Black women, we both experience racism, but Black women also experience sexism. A shocking stat that I found out about was, so the number of... Find the answer to that on Apple Watch. Sorry, my Apple Watch just randomly started talking. There's about 19,000 professors in the UK, and out of that number, there are 90 of them which are Black men, and then only 35 of them are Black women. So you can see how racism can manifest differently within the groups. Another thing this university is doing, they're looking at including anti-racism in their welcome talk. So on day one, students know this is what the university cares about, these are their values, and you should respect those values and adhere to them. So that was quite a lot of actions from University A. And so moving on to University B. So they're a considerably smaller university. They're not Russell Group, they're post-92. So they were Polytechnic beforehand. These are the challenges that their Vice-Chancellor spoke to me about. when they were talking about their stance on racism, talking about Black Lives Matter and decolonization, initially their senior leadership team did not want to put out a statement. They felt like it could have appeared like virtual signaling, because they didn't have a very good track record of this work against racism, so they felt like it would be a bit odd to just randomly put out a statement. But then they put one out because staff members came forward and they said, why aren't you doing this? And so they felt the need to. And so after they put out their own statement with how they felt about racism, staff were not happy because it didn't include any specific actions that the university were taken. The university hasn't received any student feedback on the topic of racism and decolonization. And also they quoted COVID-19 as being a factor of not allowing them to reflect or have enough time to make analysis of their approach or what to do next. So actions, they highlighted to me three actions. So they pointed towards signing up to the Race Equality Charter. This is something that a lot of universities point to when they say we are taking racism seriously, we're taking decolonization seriously, but there aren't many people, many institutions that actually have achieved the Race Equality Charter mark. There are only a few that have the bronze, and there are none that have silver or gold. And so I think that's an issue there that needs to be unpicked. One thing that they did say, though, was that it had a high-level executive sponsor for it, and that was one of their Vice-Chancellors. And I thought that was good that they had that leadership there. They had BAME staff. They have a BAME staff network that was recently created, and they also had an option for white allies to join. And I think when done in the right way, that could be a good thing. The BAME staff network should have their own space, but then also I think it was quite good that they had the option of people that really wanted to help. They could show that by being supportive of what came out of that BAME staff network. It won't work in many, it won't work in all institutions, but it seems to be working in this university. They are also looking at, they're awaiting a report from Universities UK. They are looking at tackling racial discrimination, racial harassment. And so they're awaiting that report. So if you weren't aware of that, keep an eye out for that report. It should be coming in the next few weeks. So moving on to common challenges and recommendations and what you may be able to take forward. Just to note that these common challenges are not just from these two institutions. They come from all 11 institutions I spoke to and the 10 universities I spoke to. One of them was a specialist academy. So one of them said, decolonization is an issue. And I think this is a really important thing to say here today, is that decolonization, you need to make sure that the people in your institution understand what decolonization means, because some people can be very defensive at first because they don't know what it means. It could have negative connotations to them. So explain what the term means to them, and explain that explain the actions that it takes to decolonize the institution. And so one of our recommendations to universities and SUs is that to actually do work for Black lives and do work against racism, decolonization needs to be at the heart of it. Decolonization doesn't mean silencing people. It means breaking down the structures that they have that were not built for everyone that we have today, breaking that down and making sure that we can build it up to something that represents all of the people that we have today. So yeah, decolonization, one of the things I would say is make sure that your institution understands what it means, and make sure that they use that term as well, because some of the universities that I spoke to, some of them were trying to use words like, oh, we want to diversify things, and that doesn't have the same power or meaning as decolonization. So make sure everyone's on board with those terms. So finding the right words and actions. So some people have said, oh, they're really scared about saying the wrong thing. They have no idea what to do with work for against anti-racism. And okay, so that is a very real problem that is probably within all universities. There are people that are very genuinely worried about saying the wrong thing or doing the wrong thing. What do you do about that? You need to make sure that all of the people that you have in your university are able to have access to anti-racism training. In my opinion, it should be mandatory for all staff and students and student officers, in the same way people may have health and safety training. And I think this should be disseminated centrally by departments that usually handle people development and student development. So in a certain university, it could be your HR department, it could be another department, it could be your student union doing it for students. So make sure that people have access to anti-racism training. Different universities have different resources. I think this is a very essential thing in the fight against racism, and making sure that an institution can be truly decolonized. So I think this is one of the most important things that institutions can do. So some have quoted a lack of authenticity and credibility as an issue for them and a real challenge. Like I highlighted before, one of the vice-chancellors didn't want to put out a statement because it kind of it looked like virtual signaling to them. To move forward, one of my recommendations is that universities need to acknowledge past failings, and this looks very different in different universities. And so, you know, your own institutions, have a think about what that might look like. Make sure that people can be open about it, and so people can see that universities or SUs can be are genuine in their passion to fight against racism. And also another thing is that people may be doing good work, but we might not know about it. So we need to make sure that you can communicate that widely to students and staff. This can also look like different things in institutions. It can look like having face-to-face meetings. It can look like having push notifications on your university app about the work that they do on their app relating to racism. So another challenge people have said is that setting priorities and taking prompt action. COVID is a massive thing, obviously, but I believe that anti-racism plans should be built into their COVID-19 response. COVID-19 has exacerbated inequalities, and if you don't do the work to fight against inequalities, then it will just be even more worse. And so you need to make sure that you can see them as something that both complement each other. And again, this could look like different things in different universities. Ownership of anti-Black racism work. And this is one of the main things that will look different in different institutions. One of the things that I recommend is that it shouldn't be left to just like your EDI committees or your HR departments. It needs to be everyone's responsibility. There needs to be a strategy that everyone subscribes to. There needs to be plans that are made long-term and both short-term, because people are tired of waiting, and there needs to be clear targets for people that are working at all levels. ownership of anti-Black racism work, and more recommendations for this. Universities should include their expectations for anti-racism and decolonization within their code of conduct. So when people go to their universities, they know what to expect. It should be communicated in recruitment and enrolment stage. We also think that that there should be a dedicated member of staff, like University A has done, that focuses on this work and can report directly to the Vice-Chancellor. So it is seen at the very highest level. More recommendations. I highlighted this before. University board, they are in charge of the strategic direction of your university. Some boards are big, some boards are small. Some boards may have room for people to have that dual assurance mechanism where someone can have a specific remit. Some boards may have to just use it as a standing item agenda, like I've recommended here. And so that will make sure that it's always on top of the agenda. This is another thing that looks different at different universities. Some universities have loads of Black students, so they have a lot of data on the Black student experience within their courses, what it's like in their student union and accommodation. And institutions, they love data, they love evidence-based things to help them in their work. Unfortunately, for some institutions, they may not have many Black students, and so the numbers are very small, and so it can't, they say it can't tell the whole story. But one of my arguments is, if, say, a course has 3 Black students, surely it will be easy for you to reach out to those 3 Black students and talk to them about what their experience is like on their course. So there are different challenges with having different size universities and different racial race proportions in those universities. And so one thing that I think all universities could do is make sure that they have lived experiences alongside the stats. When you know, if a university, for example, has 1 student that complains about racism, and they might think, oh, that's not bad, it's just 1 person, but then they can see the story behind that. That can help people see so much more how terrible that experience is for that student. So definitely think having stories alongside stats is really important. I think this is one of the last challenges that I will highlight here today, but in my research project, there's loads of different challenges, and there's about like 30 something recommendations. So if you do interested in finding out more, you can follow me on Twitter, and I'll be tweeting a link to a webinar that I'm doing in a few days that will talk about this in more detail. So racism in students' unions. When we talk about decolonization, we always look towards the university. Some institutions, some student unions may look towards themselves, some not so much. We need to, if we want things to change, we need to make sure that we can look at both the institution and the students' union. Some SUs in their if you look at how they are, their makeup of people, some SUs can be really white, and sometimes in those SUs, race can fall off the agenda. But in institutions where you may have like a Black officer who's really passionate about it, then you can see work that is being done towards decolonization. And then with that sort of thing, sometimes it's really good because that person's really passionate about it, but then sometimes that could be really hard for that person because they feel like they have all of that burden on them. Some SUs have never had a Black president. in my experience, as I mentioned before, I was the first ever female Black president of my SU, and that simply was not good enough. So we need to make sure that we can analyze the structures in both the university and the SU to move forward. So quickly before we finish this, I'd like you to tell me what you think about your own institutions. And you can do this on your phones in the background for a minute or two. Sorry, I did not message everyone. Okay, so there's a link to Menti, and I'd be interested to hear from you about what are the challenges within your own institutions and what the solutions you think could be. I'll be bringing up what people are saying in a second. Sorry about this. Is the link working for everyone? Okay. Sorry, technical issues. Yeah, sorry about that. There's something wrong with my laptop, but yeah, thank you for submitting everything. Okay. Right. I'm going to go back to the presentation now. If we have more time at the end, I'll bring up that screen again so you can see what everyone else is saying. But thank you for everyone for telling me what you think. So I mentioned before the campaign that I'm running. And if you're interested in knowing more about the reporting mechanisms and the work that we're doing towards it, please check out Make Diversity Count. Here are all of the social media handles and the petition and the hashtag that we use. Make Diversity Count. The story behind the name is often universities quote, "Oh, diversity, we love diversity," but like, what are you actually doing to make it count? What are you doing to make it meaningful? If there aren't any meaningful actions behind it, then it's pointless. So that's why it's called what it is. So I mentioned before that I have a webinar which I'm going to be doing next week. If you liked me highlighting the different case studies and the common challenges and recommendations, do have a look at that. I've tweeted that on my Twitter. We'll be going through all of the different case studies from the 10 different universities that I've spoke to, and all of the different challenges and recommendations. So yes, thank you so much for having me. I really enjoyed this, and if you have any questions, oh, I'm just looking at the Q&A. Can these recommendations be sent as a resource for attendees? Well, I believe this is being recorded, so I'm not sure where it's going to be published, but as I said before, if you're interested, I have this webinar next week, and there's going to be a report detailing all of the different recommendations and everything I spoke about and more. So if you follow me on Twitter, when that report is out, you'll have a look at that. And am I still looking for institutions for case studies? But the research project has, I've done the write-up, so not for this project, but one of the things that we're hoping to do is not, this shouldn't be a one-off thing. We should be constantly reflecting in the sector how universities are approaching anti-racism work and decolonization work. And so if you are interested in staying in contact with me, just follow me on Twitter. And I'm sure in the future, when we do more work towards this, I will say something. And if you message me, actually, then I'll keep you in mind to reach out to you. If there aren't any more questions, I will leave. But yeah, thank you so much for having me. I hope this was useful.
Thank you so much, Osaro. We've just had, oh, have you just disappeared? We've just had one more question through.
Okay.
Cheers. Yeah, the question is, you spoke about the mental health support for individuals dealing with racism and racial trauma. Do you know of any positive examples that could be used as a model to show my institution what they could work towards?
I can't say a specific university, but one of the things that I will highlight, and it's also in my research project, one of the approaches the institution has done is they are looking at the staff that they have employed within wellbeing, and they're making sure that it's racially diverse. why. One of the presidents of the SU that I spoke to, they said that a Black student came to them and they said, there's no point me going to wellbeing because you only have 10 sessions, and the first 4 sessions I need to explain what racism is to a white counselor, and then they finally get it, and then I only have that remaining amount of sessions to talk about my issues. And so one of the things that I'll say towards that question, look at the different types of people, like racially, who you employ in those services. Make sure that you have someone there that understands the different types of experiences that marginalized groups face. So in this instance, I'm talking about race and Black people. Make sure you have someone there that understands LGBTQ plus issues that may arise, and all of those other things. Another thing that another institution is doing is they are tendering for a external organization that that can do culturally competent well-being. And so they have realized that within their institution, it will take a long time for them to like change up the makeup of their well-being services. And so in the meantime, they're looking for external people with expertise in supporting Black students and Black staff. They're looking at having a partnership with them. So that might be something that you can take to your institution, and that might help. I hope that helped.
Awesome. Yeah, I think those were some really good examples. Another question we've had through is, when you were looking at case studies, did you find any difference in general between how post-92s and Russell groups responded? Like, you talked about some specific examples, but has there been some kind of generalized difference between how they've responded?
You know what? I've not seen a massive difference between them. With Russell Group universities, there are some that, because they're Russell Groups, they often have a lot of money and resource. And so some of those institutions, you can see that they've really invested a lot of money in tackling those issues. But then there are some Russell Groups there that have barely invested any money into it. And then you see some post-92 universities that may be a bit smaller. Some of them, so the one I highlighted didn't really do that much, but there are some post-92 universities that have really invested as well into decolonization and anti-racism work. So there hasn't been like one group reacting better than the other. There has been a real spread. And one thing I don't think I highlighted was that I spoke to people in Wales, Northern Ireland, England, and unfortunately I couldn't get anyone in Scotland available. But yeah, there's been a real range of responses, and I think it's up to the institution themselves to look at the budget they have. They can control their budget. I know people say that things are tight, but if you see this as a very urgent priority, you can direct resources to that if you have the willpower. So yeah.
Awesome. Yeah, thank you so much for the session, Osaro. It's been really, really interesting, and I hope those in the attendees have found it useful. It looks from the comments like they have. So thank you so much. If people want to keep up with the work that you're doing, is the best way for them to follow your work Twitter? Yeah.
Yeah, follow me on Twitter, and if you have any specific questions, feel free to DM me. And if you want me to tweet you the link when the report is out, or the link to the webinar, I know you shared the webinar link, but if you want that, feel free to DM me and I'll message you back.
Awesome. Yeah, so thanks so much, Osaro. This is the end of day 2 of decolonization in practice. For those of you joining us tomorrow morning, the second half of our session with Citizens UK on community organising starts at 10. But other than that, that is the end. Thank you.